If you think losing my husband was the worst thing that ever happened to me, wait until you hear what his brother did the very next day. He didn't come to comfort me. He didn't bring flowers or even offer a kind word. He came with one purpose: to take the one thing my husband left behind, the one thing that still felt like a piece of him. Our $400,000 cabin in Colorado. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Grace Miller, and just a few weeks ago, my entire world fell apart. My husband Daniel died so suddenly that I still wake up some mornings reaching for him, only to find an empty space beside me. We had been married for 10 years, and in all that time, the one place that truly felt like ours was that cabin. It was Daniel's dream long before it became mine. He used to say it would always be my safe place, no matter what life threw at us. So when he passed, I thought I would at least have that comfort. Something steady, something untouched. But even at the funeral, I felt a strange tension I couldn't explain. Daniel's brother, Luke, stood in the corner like he didn't belong to the family or the moment. While everyone else had tears in their eyes, he looked at me with something colder, almost like blame or resentment. Every time I moved, his eyes followed me, as if he was waiting for something. It made my skin crawl, but I pushed it aside. I told myself grief makes people act differently, that I stayed close to Daniel's parents, accepting hugs and soft words from relatives and friends. But even then, I felt Luke's stare burning into the back of my neck. At one point, I caught him watching me talk to the pastor, and the expression on his face wasn't sadness. It was calculation. I didn't know what he was thinking, but it didn't feel right. When the service ended, people came to offer their condolences, but Luke walked past me without saying a single word. He didn't even pause. He brushed my shoulder like I was in his way, then stood outside smoking, staring into the distance. I tried not to think too much about it. I had enough pain inside me already, and I didn't want to add confusion on top of heartbreak. I kept reminding myself that Daniel would want me to stay calm, to breathe, to take everything one step at a time. So I focused on the memories, the stories people shared, and the feeling that, even for a moment, I wasn't alone. But deep down, something felt unsettled. A strange heaviness. Like something was coming, something I wasn't ready for. And as much as I tried to shake off the thought, Luke's cold stare stayed in my mind. I didn't know that look would become the beginning of the next nightmare in my life, one I never saw coming. After most people left the funeral home, the atmosphere changed in a way I didn't expect. I was standing near the coffee table, trying to steady myself, when I noticed Luke off to the side with a few of Daniel's cousins. They weren't comforting each other. They weren't sharing memories. They were whispering, and every few seconds, Luke's eyes slid toward me like I was some outsider who had wandered into the wrong family. It first. I thought maybe I was imagining it. Grief can make your mind twist things. But then I caught a few words as I walked past them to get some water. Luke was talking in a low voice, but not low enough. He said something like, "Daniel told me I'd get the cabin one day. He knew I needed it more." One of the cousins nodded, like it made sense, but I knew Daniel never said anything like that. He never hinted, joked, or even suggested giving the cabin to Luke. That cabin was our shared project, something we built together piece by piece. I stopped for a second, not because I wanted to confront him, but because the shock hit me like cold air. I couldn't believe he was talking about property at Daniel's funeral. It felt disrespectful, almost cruel, but I forced myself not to react. People say strange things when they're hurting. Maybe this was Luke's way of dealing with loss. I tried to tell myself that and moved on. But it didn't stop there. A little later, while people were putting on their coats and saying their final goodbyes, Luke approached me for the first time that entire day. There was no warmth in his voice. No sympathy. Just a blunt question, as if we were discussing paperwork instead of death. He asked, "So, do you know where the cabin deed is? Was it in Daniel's office or in a safe?" For a moment, I couldn't even speak. I just stared at him, trying to understand why he thought that was an appropriate conversation to have hours after burying his brother. I managed to answer calmly, telling him it was handled and that everything was in order, but he didn't look satisfied. He kept pressing, asking whether Daniel kept backup copies, whether I'd filed anything recently, even whether we ever updated the ownership. It felt invasive, almost like he was checking how easy it would be to challenge me. I gave him short answers, only what was necessary, because something felt wrong. He was too focused, too eager, and nothing about his behavior showed grief. It was more like he was waiting for the right opportunity. A few relatives exchanged uncomfortable glances, and I saw one of Daniel's aunts tug Luke aside, whispering for him to leave me alone. But he just shrugged her off and kept staring at me from across the room. I tried to stay calm. I told myself not to jump to conclusions, not to let fear take over. But deep inside, something was shifting. Something about Luke's questions, his tone, the timing, it all felt off. Like he wasn't mourning Daniel at all, like he was planning something. The morning after the funeral, I woke up feeling like the walls of the house were closing in on me. People kept calling, checking in, offering to stop by, and even though they meant well, I couldn't breathe. I needed space. I needed silence. The cabin felt like the only place where I could sit with my thoughts without anyone watching me. So I grabbed my keys, packed a small bag, and started the long drive toward the mountains. The road was quiet, and for the first time in days, I felt a little relief. I thought the cabin would give me a moment to grieve without being pulled into everyone else's emotions. But when I turned into the long gravel driveway, my heart dropped. There was already a truck parked there, Luke's. I recognized it instantly. For a moment, I thought maybe he came to check on the place or needed time alone too. But as soon as I stepped out of my car, I realized that wasn't it. He walked out of the cabin like he'd been there for hours, holding a cup of coffee from my kitchen, wearing a look that didn't match the moment. There was no surprise in his face. No apology. No explanation. He looked at me as if I was the one intruding. Before I could ask what he was doing there, he pulled a key from his pocket and held it up like proof of ownership. "Daniel gave me this years ago," he said, almost proudly. "I always knew one day this place would stay in the Miller bloodline." The way he said it made my stomach twist. There was no confusion, no, just certainty. As if he had already decided I didn't count as family anymore, as if I was just someone passing through Daniel's life. I kept my voice steady and told him I came to spend a few days alone. But he stepped closer, lowering his voice, and said something that chilled me completely. "Grace, you won't last long out here by yourself. This place isn't meant for someone like you. You should go back home while I take care of things here." It wasn't concern. It was a warning. He made it sound like the cabin was already his responsibility, his property, like he was doing me a favor by letting me walk away. Then he added, "I'm not leaving. And honestly, you coming here right now just makes things harder." I stood there, trying to understand how he could be so blunt, so confident, so bold just one day after burying his brother. But he didn't look ashamed. He didn't even look nervous. He just watched me, waiting for me to argue so he could push harder. I didn't want to fight in the driveway like we were strangers fighting over a parking spot. So I took a deep breath and walked past him into the cabin. Inside, I noticed little signs that he had been settling in, his jacket on the chair, his boots by the door, a half-eaten sandwich on the counter. He wasn't visiting. He wasn't grieving. He was moving in. And the worst part was he truly believed he had every right. Inside the cabin, Luke didn't even pretend to back down. He followed me from room to room, talking like he'd already figured everything out, and I was just late to the conversation. His confidence wasn't just strange, it was unsettling. It felt rehearsed, like he'd been preparing this speech long before Daniel was even gone. At one point, he stood in front of the fireplace with his arms crossed and said, "I already talked to the family attorney. He knows Daniel always meant for me to have this place. Everyone knows it. You're the only one making this complicated." I looked at him, trying to stay calm, but inside I felt a sharp jolt. It wasn't the mention of an attorney that bothered me. It was the way he said everyone knows. Like he had the whole family lined up behind him, ready to push me out. He didn't stop there. He started bringing up old stories, twisting them into something completely different from what I remembered. He talked about the time Daniel and he rebuilt the porch together, claiming Daniel told him during that weekend that the cabin would always be in Miller hands. But that wasn't true. I was there that weekend. Daniel spent most of the time talking about retirement plans, remodeling ideas, and how he wanted to make the cabin a safe place for me in case anything ever happened to him. Luke mentioned another moment, a fishing trip the brothers took 2 years ago. He claimed Daniel admitted he didn't think I could maintain the cabin on my own, so he wanted Luke to watch over it. I knew that wasn't real. Daniel never doubted me like that. If anything, he always encouraged me to take charge, to learn, to be strong. It was clear Luke wasn't just confused. He was rewriting the past to fit a story he needed people to believe. And he expected me to fall for it too. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't try to correct him. Something told me that arguing would only make things worse. He wanted a reaction, something he could twist later. So instead, I nodded slowly, pretending to listen, while inside my mind I made a different decision. If he wanted to play this as a legal fight, then I needed to be ready. I needed every piece of proof Daniel ever left behind. Not because I doubted my rights, but because Luke clearly intended to challenge them. I stepped into Daniel's small office, ignoring Luke's glare, and looked through the drawer where we kept important files. I didn't pull anything out right then. I didn't want him to see what mattered. But I made a mental list: the deed, the will, the insurance documents, and even the emails Daniel wrote when he was updating his estate plans last year. He told me clearly that the cabin was for my future. He wanted me to have something stable, something untouched by drama or family pressure. While Luke kept pacing and talking about family legacy, I kept my face steady and let him believe I was overwhelmed. He didn't need to know I was already thinking several steps ahead. He ended his little speech with a pointed warning. Grace, if you push this, you're going to cause problems you can't handle. This place isn't yours. Deep down, you know that. But he was wrong. Deep down, I knew exactly what Daniel wanted, and I wasn't about to let anyone twist his wishes. Especially not someone who couldn't even show kindness at his funeral. Luke thought intimidation would work. He thought I was fragile. He thought grief made me weak. But grief was giving me something else entirely: clarity. And I was finally starting to see who Luke truly was. Luke's behavior shifted from pushy to outright hostile within hours. By the afternoon, it was clear he wasn't planning to leave the cabin at all. He came in and out of the house carrying duffel bags from his truck, dropping them wherever he pleased. He didn't ask. He didn't explain. He acted like someone returning to his own home after a long trip. At one point, I watched him unpack his clothes on the couch and start arranging them in the small bedroom Daniel and I used as a guest room. He didn't even glance at me. It was like I had faded into the background. He kept moving around the cabin with this heavy, stomping confidence, filling every corner with his presence. Later, I heard a bottle clink. When I walked into the living room, he had opened one of Daniel's old whiskey bottles. Something Daniel treasured and only brought out on anniversaries or special nights. Luke poured himself a large glass, leaned back in Daniel's favorite chair, and took a slow drink like he had been waiting for this moment. I felt my stomach twist, but I said nothing. He wasn't done. He started clearing things off the shelves, picking up my books, my candles, even framed photos, and setting them in a messy pile by the door. When I asked what he was doing, he didn't bother lowering his voice. Your stuff is cluttering up my space. The cabin needs to feel like a home again. A home, his home. He truly believed it. I stood there quietly, watching him toss aside a small blanket Daniel had bought for me on our first trip to the cabin. Luke didn't care what anything meant to me. He wasn't just invading the cabin. He was wiping away any sign that I had ever belonged there. Then he turned to me with that cold confidence he had shown since the funeral. You know, if you keep pushing back, I'll call the family. They'll come up here and remove you for trespassing. We all know who really deserves this place. He said it slowly, like he wanted to see fear on my face. But I didn't give him that. I stayed silent, letting him think he was winning. The more he talked, the more he exposed what he was trying to do. He wanted to turn this into a family dispute. He wanted witnesses. He wanted pressure. But while he was busy building a story, I was building something far stronger: proof, records, and a careful plan he didn't see coming. I didn't respond to his threats. I didn't argue over every cruel thing he said. I let him keep talking while he made a mess of the place and filled the air with his entitlement. He believed my silence meant surrender. He believed I was overwhelmed and confused. But I was steady. Quiet on the outside, steady on the inside. I watched. I listened. I made notes in my mind of every step he took. Because the more he pushed, the clearer everything became. Luke wasn't just grieving. He wasn't confused. He wasn't acting out of sadness. He was trying to take something that never belonged to him, and he thought bullying me would make it easy. He had no idea what was coming next. I reached my breaking point the evening I walked into Daniel's small office and found Luke going through the drawers. He wasn't trying to be careful or quiet. Papers were scattered all over the desk, folders pulled apart, envelopes ripped open. He was digging for something, anything, that could help him twist the law in his favor. When he heard me behind him, he didn't even stop. He just kept flipping through documents with this frantic energy, muttering under his breath. I stepped closer and asked what he thought he was doing. That's when he finally turned around, his expression sharp and defensive, like I had interrupted something he believed he had every right to do. He lifted one of Daniel's old file folders and waved it at me. "I'm looking for what belongs to me," he said. "Daniel wouldn't leave this place to someone who can't keep it going. I know he wrote something down. I just need to find it." There was nothing to find, and he knew it. Still, he kept pushing through the files as if he could force a different truth to appear. I reached out to take a stack of papers from him before he damaged them. And that was enough to set him off. He slammed the drawer shut and stepped toward me so fast that I had to move back. His voice rose, thick with anger. "Don't touch anything in here unless I tell you. This is family property. You're only holding it because Daniel felt sorry for you." The cruelty in that sentence hit harder than I expected. It wasn't about the cabin anymore. It wasn't even about money. It was something deeper, something bitter that had lived inside him long before Daniel died. He moved closer again, backing me toward the wall. His shoulders were tense, his jaw tight, and for the first time, I saw something dangerous in him. Something that didn't care about boundaries or decency. I told him to step back, but he only leaned in further. "You think you're the victim here," he said. "But you've always had everything. Daniel picked you. He listened to you. He built this place for you. Meanwhile, he let me struggle. He had a whole life with you and left me with nothing. And now you want to keep the only thing that should have been mine." That was the moment it all clicked. This wasn't about promises Daniel supposedly made. This wasn't about the cabin being in the Miller bloodline. Luke was jealous. Always had been. He had spent years standing in Daniel's shadow, resenting every good thing Daniel built. And now that Daniel was gone, he saw a chance to take something Daniel loved. Not because he needed it, but because it made him feel powerful. When he realized I wasn't intimidated, his anger deepened. His voice got lower, harsher. "If you think you can outsmart me, you're wrong. I'll make sure everyone knows you're trying to steal from the family." I stayed as still as I could, keeping my breath steady, not giving him the reaction he wanted. Eventually, he stepped back, but his eyes stayed locked on mine, full of a quiet threat. I left the office slowly, my hands shaking, my heart pounding. I knew then that this wasn't just about protecting a piece of property. It was about protecting myself from a man who had lost all sense of boundaries, and maybe even reason. Luke wasn't just determined. He was dangerous, and I needed to be careful with every step I took next. After the confrontation in the office, I knew I had to protect myself. Luke wasn't just pushing boundaries, he was actively trying to take the cabin, and I needed proof of everything he was doing. I quietly set up my phone in a corner of the living room and started recording him whenever he made a threatening comment or admitted he intended to push me out. It felt strange at first, listening to his own words back, the way he casually threatened me as if it was normal. He said things like, "You can't stop this, Grace. I'm not leaving. I'll make sure you're out of here before anyone even notices." Every time he spoke, I kept my phone running, making sure nothing was lost. I even saved the texts and emails he sent to me in the previous days, each one a small piece of evidence showing his determination to claim what wasn't his. I couldn't do this alone. The isolation of the cabin made me feel vulnerable, and I realized I needed someone trustworthy to keep an eye on things from the outside. That's when Sheriff Tom Walker came into the picture. He lived a few cabins down, and he'd noticed Luke's truck parked there for days, sometimes with him sitting inside, just watching the property. Tom had stopped by a few times before, offering friendly concern, asking if I was doing okay. This time, I decided to confide in him fully. I explained how Luke had been threatening me, how he refused to leave, and how he was trying to manipulate the situation to take the cabin. Sheriff Walker listened carefully, nodding as I spoke, never interrupting, but his eyes showed he understood the seriousness of the situation. When someone refuses to leave your property and starts making threats, this is no longer a family argument, he said firmly. This is trespassing and intimidation. You have the right to protect yourself, and we can document everything properly. With his guidance, I began organizing the evidence I had collected. The recordings of Luke's threats, the emails, the texts, and even the timeline of his intrusion. Tom helped me fill out the necessary documentation, making sure everything was in order for the authorities. He advised me on what to say and how to present the situation if the case escalated, emphasizing the importance of staying calm and factual. Having Sheriff Walker on my side gave me a sense of relief I hadn't felt in days. It wasn't just the law backing me up. It was someone who genuinely understood the danger Luke posed. Every time I saw Luke pacing through the cabin, thinking he was untouchable. I felt more confident knowing my evidence was solid, and that help was close at hand. I continued recording, documenting, and staying alert, knowing that this situation could get worse at any moment. Luke thought he had the upper hand, but now, quietly, I was preparing to take control, legally, safely, and strategically. With evidence in hand and Sheriff Walker watching out for me, I finally felt like I had a chance to fight back, without losing myself in fear. A few days later, I decided it was time to end Luke's invasion once and for all. I coordinated with Sheriff Tom Walker and 2 officers from the county, explaining everything that had happened, his threats, his attempts to take the cabin, and the evidence I had collected. We planned to confront him while having all the legal backup in place, so there would be no room for manipulation or excuses. When we arrived at the cabin, Luke was sitting on the porch with a half-empty bottle of whiskey. He looked calm at first, but as soon as he saw the sheriff and the officers step out of their vehicles, his expression changed. He muttered under his breath, trying to act like he wasn't doing anything wrong, but the way he clutched the bottle showed otherwise. I stayed behind the officers as they approached him. "Luke Miller," Sheriff Tom called out firmly. "We need to talk. You are being asked to leave the property immediately." He laughed, slurred and bitter. "Leave? This cabin belongs to me. And everything she has. It's fake. She forged the deed. I know it." I could feel my hands trembling slightly, but I stayed calm. I stepped forward and handed the officers the folder I had prepared. Inside were the deed, Daniel's will, and the recordings of Luke threatening to force me out. The officers glanced over everything, nodding as they saw the proof clearly laid out. Luke's face turned red. He stumbled to his feet, waving his arms and shouting, "I deserve this. Daniel promised me. This is mine. You can't take it from me." His voice grew louder and more erratic with each word, and it only made the officers more certain of the situation. One officer gently but firmly instructed him to calm down and step aside, but Luke refused. He continued shouting, trying to grab the folder from my hands and pointing to the cabin as if it proved ownership. Every word he yelled, every action he took, was evidence of trespassing, harassment, and his attempt to claim the property illegally. The officers gave him clear instructions again, explaining that his behavior was illegal and that he could face serious consequences if he didn't comply. He tried to argue, stumbling over his words, accusing me of forgery, accusing the officers of bias, but he had no proof. I stayed quiet, letting the documents and recordings speak for themselves. Finally, when Luke refused to leave, the officers moved in. They escorted him off the property, making it clear that his threats and attempts to take the cabin had crossed the line into criminal behavior. They explained the charges: trespassing, harassment, attempted fraud, and property invasion. As they led him away, I stood on the porch, watching him struggle against the reality he had created for himself. He had believed he could intimidate me, manipulate the family, and take everything Daniel left behind. But now, with the law on my side and the proof in my hands, it was over. Luke's control was gone, and for the first time since Daniel's funeral, I felt safe in the cabin again. Justice hadn't required me to fight him with anger or threats. It had required patience, evidence, and staying calm. And finally, that was enough. After Luke was removed from the cabin, I thought the worst was over. I was wrong. The Miller family didn't see it that way. Almost immediately, I began receiving calls and messages from relatives, each one filled with anger, disappointment, and accusations. They said I had humiliated Luke, that I had made the family look bad, and that I should have handled things privately instead of involving the police. It was shocking. I had just survived threats, intimidation, and a man trying to take what belonged to me. And now, the family was acting like I was the problem. Their words cut in a different way, almost like betrayal layered on top of grief. But I didn't respond in anger. I knew the truth, and I knew the law was on my side. When I presented the police report, the recordings of Luke's threats, and all the evidence I had gathered, the room went silent. Every claim the family had made against me fell apart. The documentation was clear. Luke had entered the property without permission, threatened me, and tried to manipulate ownership. No amount of family bias could change what the proof showed. As the legal process moved forward, Luke faced serious consequences. The court issued charges for trespassing, harassment, attempted fraud, and property invasion. On top of that, there were court orders preventing him from coming near me or the cabin. For the first time, I realized the full weight of what I had achieved: safety, protection, and justice, all while staying calm and composed. During this time, I also learned more about Luke's motives. Through public records and a few discreet inquiries, I discovered that he had been drowning in debt for years. The cabin wasn't about family legacy or Daniel's promises. It was his plan to secure a retirement he couldn't afford on his own. That knowledge hit me hard in a different way. He hadn't just tried to take a home. He had tried to take my security, my peace, and my life stability, purely for his own gain. Finally, the day of the court ruling arrived. The judge publicly called Luke's actions predatory, making it clear that his behavior went far beyond normal family disputes. The court acknowledged that I had acted responsibly, legally, and with restraint, while Luke had deliberately manipulated and threatened me. It was a vindication in every sense of the word. I felt a sense of relief I hadn't experienced in weeks. The cabin was mine. The law had recognized my rights. And Luke's plans to take what wasn't his had completely backfired. Even though some family members remained distant or resentful, I no longer let their opinions shake me. I had faced threats, intimidation, and betrayal, and I had emerged stronger. In the end, the final reversal wasn't about hurting Luke. It was about standing firm, protecting what was rightfully mine, and letting the consequences of his choices fall exactly where they belonged. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace returning to the cabin and to my life. After the court ruling, I finally felt free to breathe. The tension, the fear, and the constant stress that had hung over the cabin were gone. Luke was out of my life, removed by the law, and facing the consequences of his actions: fines, probation, and a public record that made his intentions clear to everyone in town. For the first time since Daniel passed, I felt a sense of control return to my life. I decided it was time to focus on the cabin, not just as property, but as a home and a sanctuary. I started small, fixing the areas Luke had messed up, replacing broken items, cleaning the rooms he had thrown into disarray, and repainting walls that had been scratched and marked. Each brushstroke, each repair, felt like a small act of reclaiming what was mine. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving a point. It was about restoring peace, the kind Daniel had always wanted me to have. I rearranged the furniture, added personal touches that reminded me of the happy moments Daniel and I shared, and even planted flowers outside to bring life back to the yard. Slowly, the cabin began to feel like home again, warm and inviting, just as it had been before Luke's intrusion. I spent evenings sitting on the porch, listening to the wind in the trees, and finally letting myself grieve, reflect, and heal. I didn't contact the Miller family, and I didn't need to. Their opinions no longer mattered to me. They had chosen sides, and that was their choice. I focused on my life, my safety, and my happiness. By living fully, by caring for the cabin and myself, I created a life free of their toxicity. Meanwhile, Luke faced the reality of his actions. The legal consequences were serious, but the social consequences were even greater. Everyone in the town knew what he had tried to do, and the shame of his actions was clear. He had thought he could manipulate, threaten, and take what wasn't his, but in the end, he had destroyed his own reputation. He had spent years trying to take control of my life, and all he had done was highlight his own selfishness and greed. I never sought to hurt him. I didn't call him out publicly. I didn't respond with anger or revenge. I simply lived my life as Daniel intended, protecting what he had left me. Not just a cabin, but dignity, peace, and freedom. The ultimate revenge was not violence, not confrontation. It was watching him face the natural consequences of his own choices while I flourished. I was safe, secure, and surrounded by the memories and love Daniel had left behind. Every morning I wake up in that cabin, I feel the calm and strength Daniel always wanted for me. The air is quiet, the house is peaceful, and I am finally free to live without fear, without manipulation, and without anyone trying to steal my happiness. In the end, the cabin remained mine, Luke faced justice, and I reclaimed my life exactly as it should be: whole, calm, and untouchable.